Hey everybody, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and by popular demand, I am finally releasing my XDefiant audio video to help get the most out of the game, help you enjoy it more, hopefully make you more competitive along the way. Now, to temper expectations, any kind of custom EQ is not going to all of a sudden make you Shroud or some, esports level player. However, I do feel that by optimizing the sound, we can help kind of level the playing field and give you somewhat of an advantage over what you would have had. It doesn't guarantee it's always going to be a big improvement because that's how audio works. Now, depending on the game, and in this case with XDefiant, your results will vary as well. If there's a lot of chaos and explosions and other things happening, no EQ is going to make a footstep sound magically sound better than everything else. We can't control sound effects separately. All the game is kind of presented to your headphone, IEM, whatever you're using as a whole. So what I'm doing in this video is I'm cleaning up the audio mix. I'm making it easier to localize audio cues. So even in some of those chaotic situations, hopefully if you do hear a footstep, it's going to be a little bit easier to discern where that's actually coming from. Now, there are chapters to save you some time, so feel free to skip ahead, but keep in mind, I'm going to assume that you already know what I'm talking about. This whole parametric EQ thing and doing a custom tune for your exact model requires a little bit of knowledge about how audio works, which I will briefly explain in that chapter. And then, of course, we have the universal Sonar or parametric EQ tune, and then universal 10-band tunes. And I'll also teach you how to make these settings applicable for Xbox or PlayStation when possible. Obviously, we're limited with what hardware allows us to do, but I will cover that. Now, the first thing you want to do is customize a couple very minor tweaks in the game itself. So if you click on settings in the top right, and then we go to the audio and voice chat, all we have to do is adjust a few things up here. Now, dialogue volume is basically, it's self-explanatory. When characters are talking, how loud do you want them to be? And typically you want to reduce this to about 30 to 40. The idea of this is that if someone's talking and they're too loud, it's going to drown out some of those, more quiet footsteps. So we want to reduce dialogue volume. We also want to reduce music volume because, again, you don't want to compete with the other sound. The sound effects volume and UI and main volume can all stay at 100. It won't affect anything to do with footstep cues, but just those simple changes alone can help at least get you on the right path. Before showing you my custom EQ target, I do want to explain a couple things for console. So if you have an Xbox, you can't do parametric EQ unless you have, at least as of the time of this video, a SteelSeries Arctis Nova 5, which has onboard parametric EQ, huge win, or the Astro A50X, which is a better headset overall, but from a competitive standpoint for FPS, isn't going to be a drastic difference in sound. If you do not have either of those, I will explain how to make this tool work for everything else, assuming you have a 10-band equalizer. And if you don't have a 10-band equalizer built into the headset, let's say you have the new Stealth 600 Gen 3 or the Razer Black Shark V2 for PlayStation has a 10-band, for example. If you don't have those options on Xbox, you can purchase the Dolby Access app, which is $20 if you don't already own it. And that gives you 10-band EQ to work on everything you own, not specific to a headset, which is really nice if you have more than one product or you have IEMs as well. You can still benefit there. Now on PlayStation, the exact same thing applies. However, you cannot purchase the Dolby Access app. You do have the same options for headsets I already mentioned, but you also have the ability to do a custom DAC, such as the Creative G6 or the X5 or the GC7. Just as an example, those have 10-band EQs built in. So if you have a wired headset, headphone, or IEM, you can use something like that and still do a custom 10-band EQ. This is, of course, if you don't have a wireless headset that has its own ability to do custom EQ. Now, you also have the option of running something like this. This is the Quiddle X5K. I've talked about it in prior videos. This is about $120, give or take, and it allows full parametric EQ with microphone support using a headphone jack. So if you have a wired headset, you buy this box and run a longer USB-C to A cable to the front of your PlayStation. You can control it with your phone via Bluetooth, do your custom tune, and then you have incredible sound quality with a lot of flexibility. So here's my website that a lot of this custom EQ tooling stuff is going to be based off of. If you're new to the channel, huge thank you for stopping by, and I will have links for all of this in the description below to help kind of put you on the right path. I have one database for all the headsets and headphones I've measured, and I have another database for all of the IEMs I've measured because they do measure slightly differently, which requires a slightly different sound signature. Now, if you're on PC, I want to start with this. Let's say you have the Logitech G535 headset. And you can use Logitech software to do custom EQ, but it's not going to give you the power you need. If you're using your headset on PC, regardless of what headset you have, it's much easier to use a program called Equalizer APO plus Piece, or you can use SteelSeries Sonar if you want to manually type everything in and still have the ability for parametric EQ. But I'm going to assume you're using Equalizer APO, and then I'll also teach you how to convert it if you're not. So if you aren't familiar with it, I'm going to go back. You see Equalizer APO here, and that is the basic program that allows us to do custom EQ. And then Piece, once you've downloaded and installed that, go to Piece on the right-hand side here. Again, I'll have links in the description for this. Download and install that. Now Piece is ready to go. That's what you're going to open whenever you want to do custom EQ. So you press the Windows button, type Piece, and once it's installed, it'll pop right up. So let's say you have a gaming headset that's listed here. Let's say you have the older Corsair HS80. This is how it measures. Frankly, not the best sounding sound signature out of the box. It's kind of flat and stunted, if you will. Not super competitive for games like XDefiant. So this is my XDefiant ideal target curve. You can see it's quite a bit different to what I think is ideal for that game. Now you're probably wondering how I came to this target EQ, which is a great concern to have. Now I've used a lot of experience with EQ and understanding how different frequencies or sound effects interact with each other. I use spectrum analyzers to measure and isolate footsteps, thirsting someone, the really high frequencies that you get when you crack a shield. All of these things play into the overall experience of the game, and sometimes they compete with each other and make it harder to either enjoy it or discern where things are coming from. So through use of a lot of tools and extensive work, like over 40 hours of work, I came up with this target, and then I tested it on about 20 to 25 products. I kind of lost track at this point, with a mix of headsets, headphones, and IEMs going from 20 to 30 bucks all the way up into the $4,000 range, just to make sure this translated to everything. And that's where I settled on this target. Looking back on the graph, you can see that target here as the dotted line. And the same thing applies again if you're new to the channel. I have one for Warzone, I have one for Apex Legends, and eventually Siege and Valorant and some others will be coming. So let's go to the XDefiant curve. You can see again that it's different. So if I want to customize this, I'm going to click Equalizer on the top left-hand corner here. Now, there's a few tricks to understand. By default, it does 10 bands of parametric EQ, which is how many adjustment points we can make. And by default, I don't touch anything over 9,000 hertz. Now, technically, even over 4,000 hertz is going to vary, or even a few, like 3,000 hertz, will vary on how your ears hear the sound versus my rig, because my rig is simulating a human ear and how we hear frequencies. So this isn't going to be 100% perfect for everybody, but it's going to get us close. So don't worry about the upper frequencies if we're not touching that. That is intentional. So now that we've clicked on Equalizer on the top left, all I have to do is look on the left-hand side here, and you can see Auto EQ. So I'm going to click that now. The page will run for just a moment. And now the red line is the new sound signature specific to XDefiant for the HS80, the older version. This is perfectly tuned to get the most out of the headset and make it competitive. Now, if you want to use this, you can either copy all of these settings on the top, on the left-hand side here. So let's say you're using SteelSeries Sonar, you would type these in, the gain, the Q factor, and mimic those exact settings, at least to what you're allowed to do. And the reason why I say that is some programs, like if this program here or website says do minus 12 decibels here, but you go onto a product that only allows -6 or -9, well, then you can just go to -6 or -9. Piece with Parametric EQ, that new graphical program I was talking about, allows you to do anything you want, and that's why this is giving you that flexibility. Now, Piece also allows you to go beyond 10 bands, whereas some products like the Quiddle X5K, it may not give you that flexibility, or the Astro 850X. That's why, again, the default is 10. If you feel like something's off, like you can see just over 800 hertz here, there's still a little bit of a hump. I can actually hit plus a couple more times to give you some more options. Hit Auto EQ again, and it may catch that, and you can see now it's leveled off in that same frequency. So I'm more close to my target, and now I'm using 12 bands instead of 10 to do it. Once I'm happy with the result, I can click Export down here on the bottom left. So let's do that now. And you can see this in real time. I'm not doing any edits. So this by default says Corsair HS80 filters. I just like to highlight the end of it and change filters to XDefiant. And I'm going to hit save here. So that's done. Now, if I go to Equalizer APO, which is, assuming that you've installed the Piece add-on, and I click import here on the right side, We're going to browse for it. Now, we just did the Corsair HS80. You can see it right here. I'm going to hit open. It's going to say that there are 12 filters. The current number is 11. The equalization will be totally replaced. I'm just going to click OK. It'll restart. Now, this whole thing is custom tuned completely for XDefiant, plug and play. This is very handy if you have 5 to 10 different audio products you like to game with. Some people have a problem, and we collect audio stuff, obviously. So this will give you a very quick ability to toggle. Now, the one thing I want to point out, because this made a very significant adjustment somewhere, you can see that at 7,000 hertz, this made an adjustment of plus 11.7 dBs. That is quite extreme. And that's because it's trying to fill in for the null that this rig measured right about here where the green line is. Now, I don't always recommend following this verbatim, and this is where you can use your own judgment. Usually that dip isn't exactly where that dip is on your ear, so it might create an unnecessary dip. And I'm not trying to confuse you, but I'm trying to explain why if something sounds off, look at those extremes, because I can only force the computer to do so much. And instead of plus 11 decibels here, 11.7, maybe I'm just going to do 5. Now, do you see the difference on this curve? It's not quite as high as it used to be. You can try the default EQ first, but if something sounds off, maybe be less aggressive with the adjustment. Or if you don't want to hear that adjustment at all, you can right-click here and toggle it on and off, which is kind of cool. Now, if you don't want to re-export, you can literally just drag this up and down and go to it. And so I'm going to go back to where it was originally just to, again, show you how this works. Now, by boosting that, it reduced the preamp at the top. You can see minus 12.5 decibels. That is a huge reduction in volume. It's doing this to make sure you never have any distortion, but that's going to significantly reduce your headroom for volume. It's going to make the headset that you're using sound a lot quieter. So I usually, to make this a 1-for-1, just regardless of what it's set to, a lot of my audiophile people are going to be like, that's crazy, why would you do that? But for gaming, distortion is less of an issue, in my opinion. You shouldn't have much distortion, but if you do hear weird clipping or distortion issues, lower this a little bit, maybe 3 or 5, but don't go super aggressive. I don't think it needs to be minus 10, for example. I have typically left this at 0. And then I just toggle it on and off as I play because I want to hear how much of a difference it makes. And I don't want a volume change to impact my perception of what EQ is doing. Because obviously if it's louder, it sounds like you're hearing more anyway. So make sure you're happy with the tune. And again, you can play with this. Now, I'm going to show you how to convert this for other products, but you can see how easy and effective that is. If I wanted to convert this to Sonar, then I would just use the SteelSeries app and type these in. So just to show you just a couple of those steps, if I wanted to do that, you can see 25 hertz minus 6 decibels. So I'll click it, I'll type the 25 and hit enter. I'll do minus 6 and hit enter. And this one had a Q of 0.8, which is really close actually to what I had by default, but I'm going to type 0.8 on Q and hit enter. Now I've just mimicked that left setting, and we can kind of go through and add more points if we want to use this tool. 78, enter, and I do plus 2.9. And then that had a Q of 0.9, so I'm going to do 0.9 here. Now you can also change the lowest frequency. It's peaking EQ'd by default. If I hit low shelf, you can see it kind of changes the curve a little bit, but it also better reduces the sub bass. So again, you can play with that. On Sonar, I do have a generic EQ that I'll show you in a moment that's applicable for everything. It's just not as effective as the custom EQ because unless you use a tool like this, there's no way to know what your product sounds like, and you can't just apply the same EQ for everything. Because if one headset has a lot of bass and one has a little bit, and I boost bass, one of them is going to have way too much, and the other one may sound closer to how it should. And that's why this whole customization feature is so important. On the IEM side, the tooling and functions are exactly the same. We're just going to pick one, and let's do the IO Audio Volare, which is a great sounding IEM for music. You can see compared to the Harman curve, it's like pretty awesome. Honestly, I actually like that sound signature a lot. But if you compare it to XDefiant, there are little tweaks here and there that I can make to make it better for me to enjoy the game more. So again, I click it, I hit equalizer, auto EQ, and then I'm already good to go. This gets me so close to on the money of where I want to be, and I can just click download, and within minutes, I'll be up and playing. So let's say you have Dolby Atmos as your EQ option, or you're using the Creative G6 for PlayStation, and you only have a 10 band, and then you want to find your product. It's going to be a different process, but it doesn't mean it's impossible to do. So let's say you're using the Drop PC38X. It's an excellent headset for gaming, well made, sounds great, great microphone. Sound signature again is going to be a little bit different than XDefiant, so we want to fix that. Now, you can't use auto EQ for Xbox because you don't have piece with parametric EQ available. You have to use Dolby Atmos. So I'm going to reset this page. If I click on equalizer, you can see that everything is at 0 now. Now, what you have to do is you have to mimic a 10-band equalizer setting from Dolby Atmos. And by looking at the Dolby Atmos app, you see 32, 64, 125, all the way up to 16,000 hertz. And you can't change these frequencies. You can only lift or reduce those frequencies. So if I go back to the tool here, I'm going to mimic that. I'm going to type 32, I'm going to type 64, and then once we've manually typed all of these in, we can then make our adjustments. Now, 10-band equalizers have a fixed Q of 1.41, and a lot of people have no clue what that means, and that's totally okay. Q is your quality factor, or how wide or narrow you are adjusting that frequency. Now, with parametric EQ, if you remember earlier when we were doing all these changes, you can see this has a Q factor of 2.3, then 0.7, 1, 3.8, etc. These are all affecting how wide or narrow those changes are. And if I were to visualize that for you, when we're looking at these frequencies here, if I set my Q factor to 7 and I do plus 10 decibels, that's how narrow this lift is at 500 hertz. Now, if I do a Q factor of 2, watch what happens. You see how much wider that was and how it lifted everything? So this is the power of it. And if I go to 0.3, look how I lifted basically everything by quite a bit. So a graphic EQ, when you look at the Dolby Atmos app, not only are these bands fixed, but the Q factor is also fixed. It's at 1.41. So again, if we want to perfectly mimic Dolby Atmos or a creative G6 DAC, I'm going to type 1.41 into all of these fields. So I just highlighted it, Control C, and I'm going to paste this on every single one until I'm basically full. So now I have the left frequencies here aligned with the Dolby Atmos app. I have the Q factor aligned with the Dolby Atmos app. And now we're back to the stock sound signature. So in order to get closer to this, we're going to just work with the bands that Dolby gives us. So let's do +4 here. That's at 124, 125 hertz. Looks like I can go a little bit stronger. So let's lift that. Now for this headset, the PC38X, I can lift 64 hertz a little bit. So let's go to +2. And you can see because of the Q factor being 1.41, I actually lifted 125, just a little bit extra as well. The sub bass is still emphasized just a little bit. So let's do -3. And you can see now I'm all of a sudden getting much closer to the ideal bass signature for XDefiant. And this is what I would translate to on the Creative G6 DAC or a 10-band equalizer from Razer or HyperX or Corsair or the Dolby Atmos app on Xbox. So all of these things make it very easy to visualize what you're changing. So plus 200 or 250 hertz, let's do +1. I think that's pretty close. It's off by a half a decibel maybe, but that's pretty damn awesome in my opinion. So we're a little bit hotter here at 1000 hertz. So I'm going to do -1. That's getting there, but I don't want to get too aggressive because you'll lose some of these mid frequencies here. You can always boost the 500 hertz by 0.5. Okay, that's not bad. And then 2000 hertz, there's definitely a hot spot here. So I'm going to try -2, which is going to further reduce the 1000. But look how close we are to the target. Honestly, I wouldn't even keep going from here. This is so darn close for that game that we don't necessarily have to adjust everything else. The rest of it is kind of by ear. If you feel like it's lacking detail or dark sounding, maybe we'll take the 4000 hertz and boost it by 2. Now I lifted the whole thing back up, but again, this is where personal preference comes from. The higher frequencies like 15,000 hertz and up, that's kind of like our perceived soundstage. So if the audio sounds really, really dark to you and you feel like it's congested, you can always take 16,000 hertz and boost it by 3 decibels or so just to get a starting point. Or if you find things are very fatiguing, too metallic sounding, something like the Basin, which I had around me. I don't know where I put it right now. The Basin MT Pros, they are here. They're just kind of stuck. These guys have stronger upper treble. So does this SimGot Super Mix. You may want to reduce that upper treble just to make it a little bit easier to focus on the frequencies you care more about. So play around with these, but this is all you have to do to make it custom tuned exactly for your product hoping that it's listed there. Now, there are a couple cool tricks we can do here to help give you more flexibility than what even my site, which is hosted by another reviewer, Super Review, link in the description for him. Let's say you are browsing for IEMs. I'll start with that because it's relatively easy to show you. So I don't have every IEM out there. Some people have reviewed a lot more IEMs, but let's say you want to use my frequency response for that IEM, or like my target, and get that added. So if I click on this drop-down list at the top, you can see other people listed here. Now I'm going to click on Super Review because I like this guy. He runs this site for everyone as a free service, which is based off the CRIN project. So let's say you have the CCA Hydro IEM, very different sound signature, right? I can download that graph here where it says export graph. And there it is. It says CCA Hydro. I'm going to do test. So I'm going to hit save. Then I'm going to go back to my site, the Gadgetry Tech SquigLink / IEMs in this case. Let's go back. Now, if I deselect by clicking X and I click on equalizer on the top, I can hit upload FR for frequency response. So I'm going to pick the one that he allowed me to export. So there's the CCA Hydro test, hit open. Here's the frequency response of that one. Now this is normalized by 500 Hertz, so I'm going to normalize it by decibel. That's a little bit easier to see the difference. So I can still do the custom EQ now because I imported it. So I'll hit custom EQ or auto EQ. And now I was able to add someone else's measurement to that target curve and benefit from it. The same thing kind of applies for headsets and headphones, but because they have different rigs to simulate the ears, it might just be slightly off. So again, you want to tweak it to your liking. The other option, just to be straight up honest, is you can export the target where it says target XDefiant, click download, export graph. Now XDefiant target demo, I'll call it. I'll go to someone else's SquigLink site entirely that does IEMs. So here's one from a YouTuber called Jatis. Now he has his own measurements of different IEMs here. So if I click on the Moondrop star field, now I can actually go to EQ and upload target instead. If I go to XDefiant target demo, there's my target now added to his site, which is not persistent. When you refresh, it's gone. But I can once again choose this item. It says choose EQ model, Moondrop Starfield 2, auto EQ. And again, you could use his page to do the same thing. Now his audio EQ range is set all the way to 15,000 Hertz. So this is another thing to keep an eye on when you're starting to play with different sites. I never recommend auto EQing that high. You can do 8,000, 9,000, 8,000, 6,000 even. Let's hit auto EQ again. Now the rest of it's left alone, but I'm only addressing this section here. So you have a lot of versatility in covering various measurements that may not have been on my site, but are still available publicly. Now, if your headset, headphone, or IEM is not on that list, I apologize. I can only measure what I have or have purchased. So if you don't have it, you can always shoot a comment below and I'll try to add it. Otherwise, I do have a universal EQ that I'm going to show you in a moment on Sonar, which you could just apply towards piece equalizer APO to auto import it. And I'll have some links again in the description below. Sonar allows you to auto import different people's EQ profiles directly, so you don't have to type all of this in manually. So I'll show it in case that doesn't work, but otherwise check for the description for that link to save you some time. Now you obviously see a different sound signature or different curve than what we just showed. And that's because with this, we don't know what your product sounds like. We're just trying to shape the general sound signature a little bit. And then I'm going to use these sliders at the bottom here to kind of fine tune it. So you can see that if I zero everything out, this is the default sound signature. I was obviously playing with it earlier. And this will be posted on the screen to save you some time. I'm not going to go through them all right now, but these different frequencies that you can type in or import will shape it to what I felt was better from a universal standpoint. Now, let's say you have something like the VZR Model 1, which I actually have next to me on my hook right here. This is a very bass forward headphone that has a scoop in the mid-range and different peaks in the treble. So this sound signature may not be perfect for that exact headphone. So you import this and then listen to it and play the game for a little bit. If you feel there's too much bass, then you grab the slider down here and reduce it. And you can see I'm pulling the bass back down. Now there is a little bit of that hump there. So you can kind of address this by adding one more point to fill that dip. But overall, this is how we can shape the sub-bass frequencies or the lower frequencies. And right here, you can see I'm affecting the mid-range and upper mids just by adjusting that slider. And then you can have the treble slider up here. For the VZR Model 1, I just pulled down upper treble just slightly, and I reduced the bass just slightly. Now I left everything else the same, and this got it a little bit better tuned from a universal standpoint, but that's on the measurement list. So I just wanted to give you an idea of how this works. Some people are going to ask about spatial audio. I never use spatial audio with Sonar for gaming. It hasn't really been beneficial for me, but you can use Dolby Atmos because that works a little bit differently than the virtual spatial audio that Sonar does. So always try for yourself and see if you like one over the other. But for Sonar, all I do is the custom EQ and nothing else. If you're using a generic 10 band, this is kind of how it looks on Dolby Atmos, which I'll have numbers put on the screen or approximate numbers to plug into a 10 band equalizer. And again, play with it. If you find that it's too much bass, especially on the lower frequencies, just take the 32 hertz and reduce it more. If you found that it sounds too anemic and you're lacking any kind of a bass, then simply boost the lower frequencies up a few decibels at a time to see, what you like or dislike. The same thing happens in other frequencies. Is if it sounds too shouty or like echoey, if you will, try reducing the 1 and 2000 hertz area a little bit. If it sounds a little bit harsh to you, reduce 4K. If it sounds like it's lacking detail, then boost 4K. And I already talked about the upper frequencies before, but this is more of a generic thing, again, to clean up the bass. Keep the mids present and the upper mids detailed enough because that's really important for spatial cues. So copy this and then tweak it to your liking. And then for those of you looking very closely, you'll see that the volume leveler is turned on. I actually did use Dolby Atmos with the volume leveler on XDefiant. It seemed to work a little bit better on that particular game than games like Apex or Call of Duty, where I preferred not to use it. I'm not saying this is a guarantee winner here, but some type of range compression, whether you use this or loudness EQ, could help improve your game, but you lose depth perception. And Dolby's version of being a compressor works differently than the loudness EQ in Windows. It does it on an object and individual channel basis as opposed to a whole. So that's why I actually thought it worked okay. So play with that too. Nothing's concrete, but I do suggest at least giving it a shot if you're using Atmos. That about wraps up my long-winded video on XDefiant. This is very different than your traditional, just do these two changes to hear footsteps. I don't believe in clickbaity, misleading stuff. And audio doesn't work that way where there's just one or two magic settings and you're all of a sudden a top-tier player. Positional awareness and good gameplay is incredibly important, and the audio is just part of that puzzle. So hopefully after watching this, you understand a little bit more about what these changes actually do. And I hope that by using this, it did improve your gameplay or at least did help you in some way, shape, or form. So if for any reason you're confused, have no idea, don't like what you see, you can always shoot a comment below. I'd love to see your feedback and what you think. But if I could ask you a favor, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button because I greatly appreciate the support. And I would love to see you at upcoming videos as they come out. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching this. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.